Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at a real communication superpower, validation.
And for this deep dive, our source material is the book, How to Listen, Hear, and Validate.
So for all you listeners out there who, want to get smart on these big topics, but without like a whole semester's worth of reading, we're going to really try to pull out the absolute key insights from this book, make it crystal clear.
What validation is, what it isn't,
Yeah,
and how it can totally change the game in your relationships, and really just everyday conversations.
absolutely. And, just to show you right off the bat why this stuff matters, the book opens up with this kind of scenario, right? Person A's just gotten back some medical test results, tells person B, all clear, nothing to worry about.
Okay.
And person B obviously is like, oh, phew, great news, let's celebrate. But then A says, actually, I don't know, I guess I'm a little disappointed.
Oh, interesting.
And the book immediately points out, like, how unhelpful B's initial reaction is.
All right.
We're just dismissing those feelings as, like, silly and suggesting celebration, just totally missing that underlying unease.
Yeah, totally shutting down the conversation.
Exactly. But then the book gives us the alternative, like the power of validation in action. Imagine B saying instead, no, that doesn't sound silly at all. Tell me more about that. I'm glad you're okay, but you seem unsure.
Right.
And that little shift, that acknowledging the feeling without judgment, opens up like this whole other level of understanding, of support. It's really powerful. And that's what we're getting into today. So let's just start right there. What is validation?
At its core, validation is about really seeing and acknowledging someone else's experience, communicating that it is, like, inherently valid.
Right.
And this is crucial. Validation doesn't mean you agree. You don't have to like what they're going through or even totally get it yourself. It's simply saying, I recognize that your feelings and thoughts are real.
It's like saying, okay, I see that this is your reality right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, of course, there's the flip side, the invalidation. How does that show up when we're, talking to people?
Invalidation is basically like denying or dismissing someone's experience. The book has these really relatable examples. It's anything that contradicts, undermines, doubts, judges what someone else is feeling or thinking.
Okay, give us a few concrete examples so we can really, like, picture it.
Sure. Imagine someone saying, pineapple on pizza, that's so weird. It might seem minor, but it's subtly invalidating their, perfectly valid food preference. Or, don't be so sensitive. That completely dismisses their emotional reaction.
Right.
And a really common one, you're stressed about your workload. Think about people who don't even have a job. That's minimizing their struggle by comparing it to others. It's making someone feel like their experience is wrong or doesn't matter.
Yeah, I've definitely been on the receiving end of those comparisons. Never feels good.
Doesn't.
Nope.
And the book gives us a few more. You're overreacting. Just calm down. Telling someone how they should feel. You say you don't want kids now, but you'll change your mind. Denying their current feelings and perspective. And then the classic parent to a scared kid, don't be silly, there's nothing to be scared of.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Really makes you think about how, even with good intentions, we might be making someone feel like their emotions are, wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So why is validation so important? Why should you, our listener, really be focusing on this and how you communicate?
Well, the book lays out some pretty profound benefits. First off, it emphasizes this basic human need to feel accepted and valued. And validation speaks right to that.
Okay.
It provides support, lets people know they're not alone in what they're experiencing. It reassures them that those feelings are normal.
Right.
And, feeling understood, especially when you're going through something tough, that's huge.
It really is.
The book even suggests validation can boost willpower and resilience. It gives an example of someone. Exactly. And finally, by trying to understand someone else's perspective, validation can actually broaden your own way of seeing the world.
Wow. Those are some pretty compelling reasons to prioritize validation. Now, the book also takes care to distinguish validation from empathy, which can get mixed up. Can you help clarify that?
Sure. The book breaks it down really helpfully. Sympathy is seeing someone else's experience through your own lens. Like,
Yeah.
if someone is nervous about a presentation because you'd be anxious, that's sympathy. I feel bad for you because I'd hate that too.
Okay.
Empathy goes a step further. It's trying to feel what it's like from their point of view. So you're imagining what it feels like to be terrified of public speaking, even if you love it. I can imagine how scary that must feel for you.
Okay, I'm with you.
Ah.
So where does validation fit in?
Validation is different. It's communicating that you've seen or heard the other person's experience and that it is inherently valid. So, using that speech anxiety example, you can listen to your friend who's scared and simply acknowledge that feeling at face value. It makes sense that you're feeling nervous. You don't have to feel the same way.
So it's less about matching the feeling and more about acknowledging that it's real for them.
Exactly. The book highlights the distinction with this example. Someone might feel very sorry for a friend who's going through a tough time, that's empathy, but still think their reaction isn't quite valid. I feel bad for you, but I think you're overreacting. Validation avoids that judgment. It's a clear way to express care.
It's like directly addressing that common complaint. I just want you to listen
Exactly.
without trying to fix it or tell me how I should be feeling.
Precisely. And there's actually research to back this up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a 2020 study by Tien, Solomon, and Bersini at Penn State showed that just asking, how are you feeling, can be far more helpful than, those knee-jerk reactions to dismiss someone's feelings.
Because minimizing someone's feelings can make them feel more isolated, like their emotions are wrong.
Exactly. So the research suggests it's much more effective to just inquire about how they are actually feeling, allow them to express themselves. And the book gives us some super practical, validating phrases we can use right away.
Let's hear those. These are the takeaways people can use today.
It's understandable you'd feel that way. Yes, that makes sense. I can see why you say that. It's perfectly normal to think that. I'm sorry you're going through this.
These are so simple but so powerful, just acknowledging the experience.
Right. And even just creating space for the person. Sometimes the most validating thing you can do is just listen with cues like, uh-huh, and nodding. It's about centering the other person.
Okay.
Their experience is the priority. They're the expert on their own inner world.
That's a great point. Now, the book also goes into these levels of validation based on Marshall Linehan's work. Can you break those down for us?
Yes, this is super helpful. Linehan talks about 6 levels, seeing it as communicated acceptance. Remember, not agreeing or approving, but prioritizing connection.
Okay.
So you're moving from just being present to actively understanding someone's history, creating deeper levels of connection.
Okay, level 1. What's that?
Level 1 is simply being present. It's showing them, I'm here, I'm listening through active listening. Nonverbal signals like eye contact, nodding, maybe a touch if appropriate, and verbal signals like yes or go on. A key hurdle here, the book says, is our own self-acceptance. We need to resist filling the silence with advice or steering it towards our own experiences.
Right, because that takes the focus away from them.
Exactly. Level 2 is accurate reflection. Summarizing what you heard without being patronizing or judgmental. The book stresses you don't need groundbreaking insights, just show you listened. It sounds like you're having a really tough time, can be powerful.
So even if you disagree with what they're saying, you can still reflect back their experience.
Totally. And remember, reflection doesn't equal agreement.
Okay.
Level 3 is mind dreading, but in a helpful way. It's about tentatively offering emotion words to capture what they might be feeling, helping them identify their emotions. I wonder if you're feeling overwhelmed. The key is to remove your own bias. Be ready to ditch your guess if it's not right.
Right, it's a gentle offering, not a declaration. So what about level 4?
Level 4 is finding context, framing their experience within their unique history. So it makes sense you'd be overwhelmed given all the changes you've had lately. The book also says you can validate unique aspects of their identity, given that you're whatever their particular situation is. Makes them feel truly seen.
So connecting their current feelings to their broader experience.
Yes. Level 5 is normalizing reactions, reassuring them that their reaction is normal, common, like anyone would feel stressed with that much on their plate, or it's normal to feel this way.
That's a reassuring thing to hear. And finally, level 6.
Level 6 is radical genuineness, reaching out on a personal level, emphasizing that shared human connection. It might involve revealing something about your own experience, but it has to be authentic, not take over the conversation.
So it's that I'm human too, and I get it kind of feeling.
Yes, but genuine. And the book reminds us not every situation needs level 6. Validation's a sliding scale.
Okay, makes sense. Now we've talked levels, but what are the concrete steps to practice validation?
The book has practical steps that mirror those levels. Step 1, be present. Full attention, resist distractions. Step 2, reflect. Let them know you've heard them by paraphrasing, summarizing, and maybe asking questions like, okay, I want to understand what you mean when you say XYZ. Can you tell me more? Avoid the cheesy, how does that make you feel?
Good tip. So active listening with questions that show you're invested in understanding.
Exactly. Step 3 is to mind read, using those feeling words tentatively, like we discussed in level 3, it seems like, or you seem quite, whatever the emotion is, gently without judgment. Step 4, find context. Communicate your understanding of their experience, connecting it to their history or circumstances.
Makes sense. And step 5.
Step 5 is to normalize. Refrain from judgment and communicate that their experience is acceptable. I think most people would feel that way in your shoes, or there's nothing wrong with feeling these thoughts. Nonverbal cues are important here too. Avoid the horrified reactions.
Right, right. And the final step.
Step 6, show genuine validation. Be real. Offer something of your own experience authentically without taking over to show you understand.
Okay, so it's a process, starting with just being there and moving towards deeper understanding. Now, we've talked about what validation is, but the book also talks about invalidation. What is that exactly, and how can we avoid doing it?
Invalidation, like we said, tells the other person their experience isn't valid. And the book stresses that it can be totally accidental, really subtle. Sometimes even well-intentioned actions can be invalidating.
Give us an example of that.
Sure, the book talks about this guy, James, who hates Burrito Wednesday at work. Everyone's excited about it. But he just doesn't like burritos.
Okay.
And even though his coworkers know this, they keep trying to include him, get him to try different burritos, insisting he'll find one he likes. On the surface, it seems friendly.
Right, like they're trying to be inclusive.
But it's actually invalidating James's genuine dislike for burritos. It's telling him his taste is wrong and needs to be fixed.
Oh, I see. So even if you're trying to be nice, you can still invalidate someone.
Exactly. And think back to our earlier point. Ultimately, invalidation boils down to making someone feel like their internal experience is wrong or doesn't matter.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
So what are some common ways invalidation shows up in conversations?
The book gives us several forms. Minimizing, oh, it's not that bad, or other people have it way worse. Rejection, you're wrong for feeling that way. Dismissing, just get over it, or you'll forget about it tomorrow. Denial, I don't want to talk about this. Controlling and judging, you're being ridiculous, calm down. And blaming, well, if you hadn't done X, you wouldn't feel this way.
Yeah, those are all pretty rough to hear. And it's not just the words, right?
Right. There's also nonverbal invalidation, eye rolling, being distracted, judgmental facial expressions, and the effects can be really damaging. It can lead to feeling alienated, worthless, confused about your own emotions,
Yeah.
and it can actually damage trust and intimacy in relationships. It can make it harder for people to understand and express their emotions in the future.
So how do we, as, people who want to communicate well, how do we avoid doing that, even unintentionally?
The book highlights a few key things to be mindful of. First, undermining language. It's not just the words, but also the tone, those nonverbal cues. Avoid hostile language, name-calling, and negativity. And the book points out how "but" can often negate everything before it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so try replacing it with "and" sometimes.
Yep.
Be careful with use statements, telling people what they think or feel, using extremes like always and never.
Right.
I statements are often more validating because they focus on your experience.
Okay, so focusing on what you're feeling and experiencing rather than assuming about them.
Exactly. And definitely avoid trying to diagnose or interpret their actions.
Okay, good advice. What else should we watch out for?
Another big one is judgmental attitudes. Let go of figuring out who's to blame or the right way to feel. Don't impose your worldview or judge the intensity of their feelings.
And jumping in with solutions when someone just needs to vent, that's invalidating too, right?
Totally. That's offering advice or going into fixing mode. People often just want to be heard, not fixed. Resist jumping to solutions or asking if they've considered the obvious stuff. Don't feel responsible for cheering them up unless asked.
So resist the urge to fix, just be present with them.
Exactly. And the last key thing is insincerity. Avoid those canned phrases that sound automatic and don't convey genuine understanding.
Like a really forced, how does that make you feel?
Exactly. Validation needs to be real. A condescending tone or empty platitudes like everything will be fine, those can actually be worse.
Because they're not acknowledging the reality of what the person's going through.
Exactly. Now, what about when we're the ones feeling invalidated? What can we do?
Yeah, how do we handle that?
The book gives some steps for when you're on the receiving end. First, don't accept it as truth. Recognize how it makes you feel, but it doesn't negate your experience. Second, communicate calmly using I statements about how it affected you. When you said X, I felt Y.
Okay.
Third, depending on the situation, you can assert a boundary or even end the conversation if it's continuously invalidating.
Right.
And finally, if it's a pattern with someone close, consider the overall health of that relationship for you. It's not about winning an argument, but setting boundaries for how you're treated.
Boundaries are so important. And the book talks about self-validation too, right?
Yeah. Yes, self-validation is crucial. It's treating yourself with compassion, affirming that you matter, your perspective is valid, even if others disagree. The book suggests affirmations, journaling, positive self-talk, and even applying Linehan's model to yourself.
So being your own advocate, acknowledging your own inner world.
Exactly. And the book makes a great point. When you're good at self-validation, you're less reliant on others and better equipped to offer validation to them.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about a tough one.
Yeah.
Validation during conflict, especially when someone's upset with you.
Right.
How do you validate someone who's angry without just agreeing with them?
This is so key. Validation is not agreement. You can validate their feelings without agreeing with the content, even if you think they're wrong, unfair, or even being insulting.
So it's about acknowledging the emotion, even if you disagree with the reason.
Yes. The book gives 3 rules for disagreeing respectfully while validating. First, understand their emotions and viewpoint before explaining yours. Second, focus on the person and their context before judging. And third, find commonalities. Are there any points you can agree on?
So shifting the goal from winning to understanding.
Exactly. The book says to change your goal from proving I'm right to seeing and being seen, understanding and being understood. When you approach conflict with validation, you can often bypass defensiveness and connect on a deeper level.
Makes sense. So when someone's angry at you, what are some concrete steps to validate them in the moment?
The book gives a helpful sequence.
Mhm.
First, listen, be present, open your mind, don't get defensive or interrupt.
Okay.
Second, reflect what you've heard, focusing on their emotions.
Hmm.
Be mindful of your tone and body language.
Okay.
Third, accept responsibility for your part, even if it's just that you weren't clear. Don't have to agree with everything, but own your part.
Right.
Fourth, assert your perspective calmly, neutrally. Use I language to explain your side, but after they've felt heard.
Okay.
And fifth, close with more validation. Maybe we language to emphasize working together. Thank them for sharing, for listening.
That sounds really thoughtful. Now, the book goes beyond validation to talk about empathy. How does empathy build on that?
While validation is powerful, the book argues that close relationships need empathy, which goes deeper. Validation is recognizing validity. Empathy is feeling their world from the inside out, understanding not just that they feel a certain way, but why and what it feels like for them. You can validate without empathy and vice versa, but ideally we want both, especially in close relationships.
So not just acknowledging, but trying to step into their shoes.
Exactly. The book gives 3 elements for developing empathy. First, open-mindedness, or maybe better, open-heartedness. It's listening actively, setting aside your ego and biases, being genuinely curious.
Requires effort to set aside our own filters.
It does. Second element is walking in their shoes, not just acknowledging difference, but seeing the world through their eyes. What matters to them? What are their values, beliefs?
Right.
What kind of language resonates? What's their focus, their attitude? Try to see how their world makes sense from their perspective. The book even suggests reading fiction to practice.
That's interesting. Fiction to build empathy.
Yeah, it helps you get into other people's heads.
Makes sense. What's the final element?
Communicating acceptance. You might have empathy, but you need to share in a way that feels meaningful. This involves compassionate language, maybe sharing something of yourself without taking over, asking thoughtful questions, remembering what they share, respecting boundaries, taking responsibility when you mess up. And the book points out that self-compassion actually enables better empathy for others. It asks, what do they need right now? What's my responsibility? Have I been honest? Are boundaries clear? What can I do to improve the situation? Have I expressed acceptance in their language?
Wow. A lot to think about. So it's a 3-part process. Being open, understanding their perspective, and communicating that understanding. Now, the book talks about empathetic communication specifically. What does that look like?
Empathetic communication is expressing your empathy so the other person feels it. It builds on those 3 elements. The book reminds us about communication basics. Sender, receiver, message, verbal and nonverbal. It needs the speaker's empathy, the listener's openness, and an accurate, appropriate message.
So both sides need to be engaged.
Right. It's about imagining the person you're talking to, their thoughts, wants, understanding, and barriers to hearing you. And it's not just words, it's tone, posture, everything.
Right.
The book says to consider your own style, strengths, weaknesses, goals. You also need to understand their perspective, values, style, potential barriers. Try to frame things in their language.
So really tailor the message to the other person.
Yes. And think about the core of what you're saying, the format, tone, language, and potential for misunderstanding. Good communication requires empathy to even understand what good looks like in each situation. The book gives an example of Beth joining a church group and expressing different beliefs really poorly with no empathy, showing how that just leads to bad communication, even if your words are technically correct.
So intention and empathy are crucial for real communication.
Totally, and it all depends on the context, the people involved.
Now, the book also talks about empathetic listening. How's that different from just listening well?
Empathetic listening is more than passively receiving words. It's active, conscious, with presence, receptivity, centering the other person. It takes effort. The book describes three types.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, making space. Removing your ego, letting their message unfold without interruption, using open body language, silence, attentiveness.
So creating a safe space for them to share.
Exactly. Second, reflecting. Mirroring their message back accurately. Paraphrasing, maybe using feeling words, being a sounding board without dominating.
Confirming without adding your own stuff.
Right. And third, reacting. Responding with empathy and compassion, using facial expressions, nodding, verbal cues, mirroring tone and posture. Be honest, but consider what they need.
It's like reacting authentically while being sensitive to them.
Exactly. And the book gives this empathetic listening checklist. Did I listen without judgment? Did I pay attention to both feelings and facts? Did I show I was listening? Did I reflect, respond, ask questions? And what did they really need from me?
So it's about checking in with yourself about how you're listening.
Right. And it emphasizes adapting your approach based on the other person. You can even ask how they want to be supported.
Hmm.
And it gives phrases to use afterward to validate and strengthen the connection. And it stresses that this is all crucial in conflict.
Okay, so basically it's taking listening to a whole other level.
Right. And the book ends with this final trick. Announce your intention to be a better listener, a more empathetic communicator. It can really change how people respond to you.
That's a great tip. Well, this has been a really deep dive into validation and empathy, all thanks to how to listen, hear, and validate. So to recap, validation is acknowledging the inherent validity of someone's experience, which is different from agreement or empathy. Invalidation denies or minimizes that experience and has negative consequences. There are practical steps and levels to practicing validation effectively. Empathy is deeper, needing open-mindedness, seeing their world, and communicating that. Empathetic communication means tailoring your message to the other person. And empathetic listening involves making space, reflecting, and reacting with compassion.
And as you go through your day, think about your interactions. Where could a little validation make a difference, and how can you extend that same understanding to yourself?